to give a quick recap of where we are in our journey. I know Dan sent out the email of the 7 levels that we've done till now. And I think that we kind of, I want to recap it with some new material. We talked about life as a Jew, and this is really what we're talking about. That's the content of our discussion, and we presented it perhaps in one light earlier when we said that the question is, what kind of world are you living in? We choose which world we live in. And we emerge, we enter the world, and everything we see is about us. We're selfish, and all our interests, all our concerns, all our priorities are for the well-being of our body. You ask any baby, that's all they care about. They care about themselves, and themselves exclusively, and they care about their physical well-being. That's their world. And as we grow older, hopefully, we're going to mature, and we'll start noticing other people, and we'll start expanding our world to include others as well. But additionally, we start to expand our interests and our priorities to include things that are not just physical. We have more sophisticated taste. We start thinking about family. We start thinking about other people and doing good in the world and making an impact and leaving a legacy. And these are examples of a maturation of a human. That's what it is. You become more mature, and what your world changes. And in Judaism, it is presented very stark contrasts. You have the world of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is the force, or it's the perspective that wants you to be totally selfish and totally physical. And then you have the idea of God, which is something we can only embrace if we're not selfish and if we open up our spiritual sides as well. And the goal of these 10 steps is to take us from one to the other. Right? From this world, or the world that starts off as being upside down, if you remember that analogy. We're in the upside down world and we want to straighten things out. We're drunk when we get sober. All those examples that we've given. The Talmud quotes a verse. The Torah says, Lo yia becha el zar. You should not have within you a foreign god. Now, what does that mean? Shouldn't swallow a little Buddha?
No, you should, not go to not worship anything other than
Yes,
God.
but what does it mean within you? So what's the foreign God that's within us? So I thought the question, wait a minute. What's this foreign God that's within us? It says that's the Yetzer Hara.
Isn't Leslie right? You shouldn't even think of it.
Yeah, okay, but clearly that's the perspective of the Torah regardless, right? But where is this deity, this pagan deity that's within us all? That's the Yetzer Hara. And, perhaps another way of looking at this is that we all bow at the altar of some deity. The question is, which one is it going to be? We start off with the dominance of the Yetzer Hara and what it compels us to do and to focus on and to prioritize. And hopefully we'll change and we'll embrace the ultimate deity, the ultimate power, and that's the Almighty. And essentially life is going to be this conflict between the inborn, dominant, or at least at the beginning of our lives, dominant deity that we have within us. And we're going to have to reverse them. We're going to have to change them. We have to kind of supplant the Yetzer Hara with God. If you look at a lot of the prayers that we have on the high holidays, which is the time where we kind of revisit these big macro Jewish issues. We talk about stamping out the foreign kingdom in the world. And of course that could have lots of meanings. But one of the meanings is the fact that there's this dominion of this foreign God over our world, collectively, but also our little small individual world. Who controls, who dominates me? Who's in control of me? What can't I give up? If you have something that you can't give up, you're beholden, right? You're submitted, you're subjugated to certain wants. Well, that is controlling you. That's your God to a certain extent. That is who tailors and telegraphs your behavior. So when you look at behavior, you have those things this I cannot possibly imagine giving up. So some people say, listen, Rabbi, you talk about kosher food, but some things I'm never going to give up. Not going to happen. I need those staples, right? Everyone has their little thing that they fill in the box with, right? These are the things that, to me, Well, okay. Well, what does that mean? It means that you are enslaved to that particular desire, want, whim. You call it a need. Right? You're enslaved. How are you not enslaved? You're not free to act on your own. Correct? Mm-hmm. You're not free to act. What does it mean to be enslaved? It means to be hindered, to be, to have obstacles. Right? And we are like that as well. And there's this control that we're under. We're under the spell of the Yetzer Hara. We're handcuffed. Can't do anything about it. Right? What does that mean? That means, to a certain extent, there's this foreign God that's within us. And everyone has this foreign God within them in some capacity. And that's why life has meaning. That's what it's all about. It's all about, we have this foreign God, and it's in control, and we can't imagine doing things other way, any other way. And it's unthinkable for us to give up on some things that we think is so necessary, so vital, and can't live without. And then to free ourselves of those shackles, to become truly free people, is what the Torah is offering us. And it's ironic, I'll get in a second, it's ironic that the Torah tells us that, and I mentioned this previously, the Torah tells us, maybe I didn't, I'm trying to remember where I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned this. If I did, pardon me. The Torah tells us that who's the free person? He who has Torah. Wait, Torah, let's read Torah. Restriction. Don't do this, do this, do that. How is that a free person? The answer is yes. Regardless of who we are slaves. The question is, to whom? To what? When we free ourselves of the Yetzer Hara, right, we may indeed stop doing things and withhold from doing things, and that itself is freedom.
Could that be something as simple as using salt?
What do you mean using salt?
You can't live without it. You get it from other foods, but actually using salt, because I'm a very heavy salter. And so is that not taking control of me that I have to have that?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. You feel like you have something you have to have.
Yeah, well...
No, it's a nutrition. If you have to have it...
What's interesting is that the Mishnah says that we have to study Torah with such commitment that even if we only have bread and salt to eat, and we can only lay on the floor, we don't have a bed, we have to be dedicated to Torah. So maybe salt's a good thing. Maybe that's, if that's all you got, right? Bread and salt.
Salt of the earth.
It's just,
Like chocolate, or it could be...
Yeah, so what's okay, so this is an important point here. Yes, of course, there's a danger of saying that there are certain things that are my hang-ups that I can't give up on. That means you're indebted to a certain extent. On the other hand, if someone says, "Oh, I don't want to be indebted to anything," and they kind of go too fast, there's going to be the pushback, the spring, so to speak. You push the spring too hard, and eventually it's going to send you back even further, right? There's going to be backlash. So that's why it's very healthy to use the Torah as the context for what we're going to say no to and what we're not going to say no to.
If you're dealing with kosher,
Yes.
if all you know when you grow up is kosher, and in Israel at least a lot of think everything's kosher, not everywhere now, but almost, then it's not that big a deal. You're not exposed to all these other things.
Yeah, but there's always going to be at some point in which you'll have the conflict. So it may not be in kosher.
Right, no, but we're talking...
That's true. I agree. So, for some people... It's a lot easier, of course, in such an environment. But there's a sort of point here I want to say. We'll get to your point in a second as well. And that is that the Torah gives us a lot of things that are prohibited by Torah law. Now, we could say that these are arbitrary and then they have value, as well. It means even if you say, "Oh, does the Almighty really care what I eat? If I eat, this kind of, do I eat a cow that has a punctured blood or a cow that does not have a punctured blood? They're exactly the same thing nutrition-wise." That's a good question. And the answer is, let's assume we're right. Let's just assume for argument's sake that you're right. Still, there's value of teaching yourself how to say no to your whims. That's valuable in any respect. Now, the question, self-discipline, is actually, but the problem is if you're too self-disciplined, if you say, "I'm not going to do anything," you become an ascetic, then eventually you probably end up becoming a nihilist, right? Because if you push yourself too hard, there's going to be backlash. So what's the balance, right? So I think the balance ought to be is that, okay, let's just follow Torah's guidelines. And therefore, Torah Torah the Almighty wants us to have a good time, right? It's not like the Almighty says, "Oh, be celibate and be ascetic and starve yourself." The Torah doesn't say anything like that. The Torah gives us modest guidelines of what we should and shouldn't do. So to say I'm not going to have chocolate because I want to fight, maybe that's a good idea, but maybe it could also be very dangerous. And because you like chocolate, and we like life, and why should life not be fun? Why should life not be wonderful?
We did a study over at Nativ a few months ago, The Path of the Just,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the topics in that was why put things on yourself that Torah did not put on yourself, because you're just setting yourself up. Because once you put that on you, you're obligated to carry through with it, and so you're.
Well, if you accept an
yourself,
oath, is that your point? If you accept an oath, then you're obligated to fulfill it.
necessarily said that it even had to go to an oath, but if I decide I'm going to put a level on myself that Torah did not put, he said, why do that? Why?
Yeah, so there's a few sources to that idea. Number one, we have the quip of the Talmud, "Dai masha asra Torah." It's enough with the Torah. The Torah banned enough things for us. We don't have to add more. And additionally, there's the episode of the Nazir. The Nazir is the guy who makes a vow to abstain from wine and from impurity for a minimum of 30 days. And at the end of that 30-day process, they have to bring a special atonement sacrifice in the temple. Why do you have to atone? It's a mitzvah, right? You're withholding from wine. You're refraining from frivolity. It's wonderful, right? Well, no. Because the Torah, the Almighty gave us wine for our pleasure, and you pained yourself by abstaining from it. And that's not a mitzvah either. And in fact, you would have to atone for that because you pained yourself from withholding from wine. My point is that the idea in general is a very powerful idea and very necessary idea, but how we apply it, we have to be very careful with how we apply it. I do think there is room for someone to say, okay, I'm not going to do something even though it's permitted by the Torah, right? The people that, obsessively check their phones, right? There's a lot of people out there like that. You're always checking your phones just to see if they get notifications, any emails, what's happening on Facebook, right? So that's permitted by Torah law. I can't find any Torah law that would prohibit that. But maybe that's a good idea to say, well, I'm going to take an hour off, right? An hour off for life outside of a smartphone, right? And maybe that's too challenging for some teenagers or whatever. But, that's not a bad idea. And I'm not saying not to do that. But I think that there's a danger of making our bodies miserable for spiritual gains. We want to kind of go slow and easy, right? We have 70 years or 80 years.
We don't wear camel hair shirts, right?
Oh, yeah. Something just escaped me. I hate when this happens. It's going to sound terrible on the podcast. Oh, yeah. So prophecy. We talked about prophecy last week. Maybe we'll revisit it again this week. But prophecy, if you look at some very famous prophets, for example, Isaac. Isaac wants to have prophecy. What does he do to have prophecy? Right? He wants to bless his son, Esau. He tells him, listen, I want you to go and catch me the freshest game out there and make me 2 massive plates of steaks. That's what he asked for. And I said, okay, Rabbi, how do we get to prophecy? You know what we do? Let's have the most delectable, succulent steak out there. That's how we get prophecy. What? Didn't we say prophecy is disavowing from the physical to embrace the spiritual? Another example, we know King David, when he would want to have prophecy, he would play music. Now, there's a big debate as to whether music is spiritual, physical, or someplace, at the touch point of those two. But either way, I'm saying that's not asceticism, that's not denial, that's embracing the finer things, the pleasures in life. How is that the avenue to get prophecy? And the answer is that prophecy is ecstatic or ecstasy for the soul, but there's this balance where if your soul is going to go up, your body's going to suffer. It has to be like that. They're opposites. You can't have both. Now, what happens if you're going to have your soul soar? What's going to happen to your body? Your body's going to have to suffer. Well, what do you do when your body is suffering? You got to throw it a bone, right? Got to appease your body. Well, how do you appease your body? With some steak, with some music, right? So we want to make sure that in our spiritual growth, our bodies on board. So we have to kind of throw it a few treats, like, good boy, right? That's what we got to do for our body. So to totally cut off its lifeline, right, to kind of corner it, a cornered body is very dangerous. Because eventually you push it too hard, you say, okay, no chocolate, no salt, no this, no that, right? You push it too hard, and what happens? It's like when you have a diet, right? Okay, I'm going off all flour, all sugar, all this, all that. And for 2 days you're miserable, and the day 3 you go on a binge like you've never seen before, right? Why? You're like, screw it, I'm out, right? And you pile the table up, and you just, you just engorge yourself with candy and junk and donuts, and right?
Debauch yourself.
Exactly, and that's very dangerous. In a second, that's very dangerous. So we have to make sure is that when we're battling Yetzer Hara, he's very cagey. He's very capable. There's a reason why he's so dominant. Right? We grow in small stages by cutting off his support, but not by kind of making ourselves miserable in the process. Yeah.
Whenever I want to limit myself from something, like for example, if I notice I'm gaining weight and I think to myself, I'm gonna get into a diet, and every single time I say I'm gonna get into a diet, I cannot do it. I even get hungrier. I start thinking of more food. I just look at everything as food, and so for me, I have to not think I'm going into a diet. I just think I have to go exercise. I have to watch what I eat. Because if I say I'm gonna go into a diet, then I just eat more.
Yeah. So this, I'm saying it's a good point. Like, this principle applies everywhere. When you want to change, how do you change? Maybe this is something we could talk about at great length here. How do you change? This is all about change, right? Mm-hmm. We start off as the baby, and we have to change. Right. So of course, life hopefully will force us to change invariably. That's the growth pains of adulthood, is that we have to change. We have to become more mature. But what are the mechanics? What are the technical aspects of change? And one of them is that it's got to be slow and gradual. And it's got to be kind of integration of a new lifestyle that you like, that's positive.
But there also has to be, I'm not sure this is the appropriate point or not, but there has to be an adult element there somewhere, a paternalistic, because if we just, if we're born and never have any connection, there's not someone there to guide us, as a baby, we're going to die.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm saying not only physically, but I'm saying if we don't have someone to kind of raise us in a responsible way, like that's the importance of parenting. That the system is set up that if there's no parent that's kind of parenting the child's going to grow awry. He's going to go in crazy directions.
Like that?
I don't know if like that.
What is that?
Just going kids.
Right? So it's very harmful for children to not have guidance and not to be told we don't do this, we don't do like those, encouragement and the proper behavior. But kids who grow up in homes or single family homes where there's only one parent to juggle a couple of kids, and the parent is usually busy or on the PlayStation or whatever, those kids grow up really messed up.
Right. But the parent is also part of God's plan, are they not?
Oh yeah, exactly.
To teach them to love your God. To speak of them when you rise up. And
the Talmud says that there's 3 partners in every child: the father, the mother, and the Almighty. Mm-hmm. And these are the 3 partners that are going to raise a child to become a great person. And if one parent checks out, or if both parents, God forbid, check out, and the person doesn't take the lessons of the Almighty, they probably won't actually change that much. They won't grow, they won't develop, they won't flourish. And that's unfortunate. We see that every day. We see in communities or in societies where the parents aren't doing a lot to help their children, the children grow up and don't exactly become the most admirable of citizens.
That could be an argument against daycare, couldn't it?
Well,
I just thought I'd throw that in.
What about orphanages?
Okay, so let's go through quickly the seven levels, the 7 steps that we've had till now. So we start off with faith as being just something that we don't really think about. It's there. It's when you asked us about faith, then we think about it. Oh yeah, do I have faith? But it doesn't really impact our lives, and that's I think the baseline level of faith that almost everyone in the world has. Besides for atheists, that's a different kind of faith, right? But it doesn't really affect your behavior. Now, 2 and 3 are going to be when someone really, they believe in it, they think about it, and it means something to them. Either in the form of a tradition, that's what their family taught them, or in the form of their evidence. But still, it doesn't really impact their behavior. Right? When we talk about Emunah, level 4 is Emunah, where when you do a mitzvah, right, you're actually feeling like you're doing the will of God. Like you concentrate. When you're praying, you try to think about the idea, I'm talking to God. Like this is how I'm addressing Him in first person. Like the mezuzah is there to remind us that the Almighty exists. The tefillin that we strap on every morning, the tzitzis that we wear, the Shabbat that we observe, these are all reminders that the Almighty exists. Because it's very easy. It means our default status is forgetting that. And in order to make sure that we kind of don't, just live life meaninglessly, we have these kinds of reminders. And then there's the higher level. And the higher level is where this is something you don't need to be reminded of. You're at all times. Of course, when you're praying, you're talking to God. Just like if you were in the Oval Office, you'd be talking to the president. Like that, you don't need to be constantly remind yourself and pinch yourself in the pants. Not to forget that you're talking to the president. If you're actually talking to the president, if you're talking to the Almighty, you're actually talking to the Almighty. And then the higher levels are going to be where this reality is so tangible, it's so palpable, it's so real, that it's equal in a sense to the reality of the physical world. We live in these two worlds, and now they're at par. Now the dominion of this foreign God that we have within ourselves and the dominion of the Almighty God, well, they both hold equal sway over a person. That's what Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe tells his students. He says, I want the fear of heaven to be your fear of heaven should be equal to the fear of man. Why is that? Because let the minimum be that there's going to be a parity between your fear of God, your relationship with God, and your relationship with other people. Right? It should be as real. Moving a step higher is where the relationship that you have with God, the reality of the spiritual relationship that we have with the Almighty, trumps the reality of the physical world. Right? So what dominates? Like what governs your world? On level 7, you're going to have someone like Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe himself, where when he meets Vespasian, he sees with his physical eyeballs the general, but what does he actually see, and how does he address him? He addresses him as king because of the verse in the Torah that tells him so. It means if the verse in the Torah says X, and your eyeballs show you Y, what do you see? Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe saw X. Like he saw a king, even though the guy was wearing the insignias and the symbolism.
He was going to be king, didn't he?
He knew that's right, but he addressed him as king.
So he also had prophecies. What I mean.
Well, that was a verse. The verse is available to everyone. I don't know if he quite had prophecy. That would be one level up.
He had 2 men tell him he was going to be king. He would win. In one, anyway, I just assumed they both had prophecy.
Well, no, Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe tells him, if you're not king, you're going to be king because of the verse of that Lebanon will fall in the hands of the mighty. Lebanon is a reference to the temple, and the mighty is a reference to kings.
My book didn't tell me that.
Well, there you go.
I just read that they said it.
But to him, like the verse is so real that would override what his physical tools tell him. Level 8 is prophecy. Prophecy is something we could all really have, technically, theoretically, of course. And that is, our soul has prophecy, right? What happens before a child's born? Right? So the Talmud records several prophecies that happen to the child. Well, how does a child have prophecy? The child hasn't accomplished anything. Right? If you were to make a list of the accomplishments of the child before they're born, it would look like this. A blank sheet of paper.
Yeah, tabula rosa.
right? It doesn't have any. There's no accomplishment. It hasn't done anything. Has faced no challenges, but it happens to be a soul, and a soul, before it has the foreign God inserted into it, right? Before it becomes under the influence of the Yetzer Hara, it's just a soul. And a soul can have prophecy, can have direct communication with God, just by dint of its existence. It's spiritual. Spiritual entities have spiritual communication. So the soul is prophecy without accomplishing it. You get the Yetzer Hara, and now you cannot have it, not because you don't have the capacity to have it, but because the capacity to have it is now hindered by the obstacle in the form of the Yetzer Hara. Should you be able to totally submit your physical and the Yetzer Hara inclination, right? Everything that was given to you at birth, if you reverse that and you bring it back to the way you were in utero, so to speak, to the spiritual balance, wherein your soul is no longer disrupted by your body. If you could reverse that, you'd have prophecy right away. Just like you had prophecy previously. We all had prophecy previously.
The
Yes.
rabbi that you were talking about that used to just sustain himself on part of a carrot, would he be at that level?
I don't remember mentioning that.
You said that his wife,
Yeah, I remember.
his wife went to his grandson, who's a physician, and she said, "You have to help my husband. He's only eating part of a carrot every day."
I don't remember saying that, but is that a reference to? I don't know who that's a reference to. Part of a carrot. Well, it's not just about that. It's not just about self-denial. You have these monks living on mountaintops doing a lot of self-denial, right?
Well, he wasn't self-denying. It was he had become to such a spiritual level he could sustain. He wasn't trying to deny himself anything. It was just he was able to sustain himself on part of the carrot each day.
Well, maybe, but we know that we can't really read prophecy. Like we're kind of matched out, probably at level 6. But this is how it would work theoretically. Maybe in other contexts, someone would be able to achieve prophecy once they are at that level. Does that make sense?
Well, we wouldn't be able to anyway, right? Because that's before the coming of the Mashiach. Then
Right. So we can't have prophecy now. Right.
Right.
That's correct. We mean the level 7, level 8. We are no longer capable of reading. This is why it's just theoretical. We're trying to get to level 4. So what's level 9? Once you have prophecy, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You said the soul is pure and everything else when it comes into the body. Doesn't it come in with the pot?
With what?
Klipot? Past history that they're trying to correct? The soul is
Well, maybe that's why our souls are not capable of prophecy because they're not in the highest levels. I don't know where do you get this idea of klipot from?
Is
Kabbalah?
this original sin? Is that?
I've never read anywhere in the Talmud about the word klipot. Sorry, I'm playing games with you, but yeah. So the idea of klipot is something that we don't find anywhere in the Talmud. Of course, we're not denying its existence, but we're kind of working within the framework of revealed Torah, So yes, I think that, and I hinted to it, that it's possible that the reason why our souls cannot reach prophecy is because they're a lower level, or they're damaged, or however you want to define it. So even if we were technically able to reverse the impact of birth, so to speak, and to negate the influence of the Yetzer Hara and expose our soul, we still wouldn't be able to have prophecy because our souls are not quite, good communicators. Think of it in the form of like a weak antenna. If you have an antenna, it can have communication. If you cover up the antenna and you disrupt the signal, it can't have communication. But you remove the disruptor and it could have the communication once again. But if the antenna itself is broken or it's not very powerful, it may be able to have communication, but not quite at great distances. Right? So maybe we could have a lower level of prophecy, something like Ruach HaKodesh or something like that. A lower level prophecy, maybe that is still obtainable for us.
That's what I was just getting ready to ask. What is the definition of prophecy versus intuition or
Well, that's the question. What's the definition of wisdom?
versus
I don't
Are
know.
they synonymous?
No, I'm just saying that wisdom can mean a lot of different things, right? The same amount of levels of wisdom that there are levels of prophecy,
Oh, okay.
right? But wisdom means wisdom, right? Yeah, it means a certain knowledge, it means a certain understanding, right? So prophecy
if I have a
is
dream and I feel like that dream was telling me something.
well. The
is
Talmud
that
says
prophecy?
that a dream is a 60th of prophecy.
A 60th.
Yeah, so 1.5% of prophecy.
So it kind of
So it's a kind of a-
foreshadow what's going to happen.
I know. I'm saying maybe this is not a universal experience, but I know that I've had times in life where I'm in situations and I'm like, I've been here before, and it was in a dream. Yeah, one of it's deja vu, but I think it's in the form of dreams. That happens. What does it mean? It means that yes, when our soul is kind of emancipated to a very small extent at nighttime when we sleep, therefore it is exposed to a certain degree to pick up certain signals.
The deja vu thing is supposed to be if it comes in one part of the brain and you see it on the other side of the brain, you think it's been there before. You know, it's
Snaps.
No, but I'm saying
no, it doesn't snap. It's just that's. I mean,
so it
we
doesn't
all
have to be deja vu, but it could also be in the form of a dream. You know, sometimes you have dreams and it's very striking, and then
Another
in
dimension.
and then like you experience that
Twilight
scenario.
I mean,
Now-
sometimes you think the dream has really occurred.
Maybe.
Is it occurring? You
Well,
know?
when,
I
while,
had it,
while
Joel,
you're
I fell
dreaming,
before.
it's
It
When
real.
felt
you
like
wake
that,
up and
you know.
geez, did that
Joel,
happen? You know,
have you
it's
done
kinda-
that before?
Well, either way,
Falling
so
and then wake up
so
and
the
you're
so
back?
that there are many levels of prophecy.
Okay.
Okay, now we define prophecy as communication with God. That's the simplest of,
Okay.
right? Now, how do you have communication with God? You have to expose the inborn antennas or antennae. What's plural of antennas, guys? Antennas. I'm gonna say antennas. Antennas. Okay. You have to expose that. How do you expose that? By getting rid of the influence of the Yetzer Hara and thus exposing what was there already prior. Now, like we said, today we cannot have prophecy, but we could have kind of lower levels of prophecy, like a bat kol, or a kol, or a ruach hakodesh, or other levels of prophecy that aren't quite direct communication with God.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I just, I think people confuse that. They have a dream and all of a sudden, they're,
Right, but like there is some legitimacy to that
they
because
can start telling you about your, people that have passed away and stuff all of a sudden.
yeah, but the Talmud says that the 60th means that there is something there. It's a little murky. It's not clear. There's always a lot of nonsense thrown in as well.
Again, why we maxed out at 6?
Why? Because the Talmud says from the day that, if you remember, we quoted this like 3 weeks ago, from the day that the temple was destroyed, men of faith ceased. The Talmud defines men of faith as someone who has food in his basket today and doesn't have food for tomorrow and doesn't worry, doesn't say, what am I going to eat tomorrow?
So the destruction of the temple was a precipitating factor.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm saying that brought about a significant decrease in kind of the spiritual vitality of the
So when
people.
the third temple is rebuilt, that would increase. Theoretically, would it?
Yes, because the idea of a temple, what's the idea of a temple?
What's
the idea?
that?
What's the idea of a temple, right? We had 2 temples, it's Solomon's temple and the second temple.
It's God's dwelling house.
Well, what does that mean? It's a certain touch point between the physical and the spiritual, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's as if the physical world did not. Think of it in the same model that we're talking about right now. You have a physical world, and that conceals the spiritual world, right? We have the physical body, the physical Yetzer Hara, and that conceals our soul and our spiritual side. You have in the world at large, you have a physical world, and therefore God is not manifest in the world, or it's manifest in the world, but we can see it because it's concealed. The idea of a temple is the idea of the world not inhibiting the spiritual elements. Thus, you have a physical representation of a spiritual entity. So you walk into the temple, and even though, yes, of course, it's a big building, it's got a lot of gold and silver and all that, but it is an actual representation of spirituality. Like the physical and the spiritual are not in opposition. The physical is not disrupting. So that kind of marks a level that's destroyed. It's not like the building was burned down. That means so much. It means that the temple is and the meaning, significance behind the temple is no longer there.
So why we can't build a temple, or I don't know, in Wichita, Kansas, and it will be...
Well, we could, but it doesn't mean anything. That's exactly my point. My point is
why
that
does it have to be in Jerusalem?
Because
Well,
that's
because
what
the Torah says it has to be in
Okay.
yeah. And there's a prohibition against building temples elsewhere. That being said, in history there were temples built in northern Israel by the kingdom of Israel. Unfortunately, they used that eventually for idolatry. There was something built in Egypt. So every time there's been an effort to build temples elsewhere outside of Jerusalem, it really went awry. And even today, there's people today that like have shovels and are ready to go, and bulldozers are ready to go and build it.
Now, when we talk,
But on Temple Mount.
But it has to be Jerusalem and Temple Mount. It
Oh,
cannot
yeah,
be done
that's
some
right.
suburb of Jerusalem. Right?
That's right.
okay, which is one of the reasons we don't do sacrifices anymore, because
Right, we're not
sacrifices
allowed to
can
do
only be
sacrifices.
done in the temple, right?
That's right. Now, that being said, there was a time where there was a temple in Shiloh
Where is Shiloh?
before they captured Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem was the last city that they captured in Israel. Right? King David captured it, and his son King Solomon built a temple on Temple Mount. They didn't. So for the 400 years that preceded that, they had a temple in Shiloh. Shiloh is in southern Israel. But once it was established as a final location in Jerusalem Temple Mount, then you can't change it. If you have a temporary temple, like Moshe built a temporary temple, right? The tabernacle, known as the tabernacle. It's a temporary temple.
So where is the Shiloh? Where in southern Israel?
It's southern Israel. You can go there. You visit there. It's I don't know exactly where it is. It's like
I mean, is it near
the
Tibet?
Dane Hills or whatever. I don't know exactly where.
And
You Google
that
it.
did not violate the
No, that was fine. But they hadn't yet established the final permanent temple.
Okay, so the Torah doesn't establish the final place where the temple.
Well, it does and it doesn't. It does because it hints at it.
Or retreating or something.
Every time it says in the Torah the place, it's a reference to Temple Mount.
Okay.
The place.
Exactly. So you look at when it says the place in Genesis and in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, we're talking about going to the place. It's always a reference to the same place, and that's Temple Mount. Abraham and Isaac go over there. Jacob stops over there on his way east, and he has this dream with the ladder. Everyone remembers that. Like, it's always referred to the same place, it's as the place. But yeah, the idea of a temple is not just a physical edifice. It's a certain reflection of the spiritual state of the world, and specifically the Jews. So if we build a temple, it's a building of wood and stone. That's what it is, if we do it. And even when the temple was destroyed, by the way, the Sanhedrin already left the temple 40 years prior. So yes, the physical building was still there, but it was just a vestige of the past because the spiritual accompaniment was not there.
So the Flavians were not as guilty as we might think about.
No, well, they just destroyed a dead building.
The shell.
It's shell, exactly.
So
I
why
mean,
did Sanhedrin move? Because if it would do the irreparable damage.
Well, they didn't move to cause that. They moved to reflect the reality. Either way, bringing us back to faith here. Once we have prophecy, what else is there? Once you have how could it be that you have prophecy and yet there's two levels more? So I want to talk a little bit about Abraham. Because Abraham is someone, very interesting, obviously, character in Jewish history. And we find some really, really interesting statements about Abraham in the Talmud. So if you look at the Talmud in the book of Avodah Zarah is the book of the Talmud that talks about idolatry, and you count the chapters, there's 5 chapters. It's 5 chapters. And if you count, and then, however, the Talmud says that Abraham, he had a book of Talmud, of Avodah Zarah, of the book of idolatry, and his book had 400 chapters.
Wow.
So if you read that, just at first glance, it sounds very bizarre. Like, did he have a different book? How did Abraham have the Talmud? Why is there 80 times more chapters in his book than in our book? What's going on?
More
Linked to
idolatry.
time,
Huh?
right? It's linked to time.
What do you mean? What do you mean it's linked to time?
Well, I mean,
There was more idolatry?
no.
Maybe.
Some in,
That's what it seems like, right?
In
Yeah,
the Torah,
it
some
would.
people live 400 years, but not 400 of our years necessarily. Right?
Well,
Who says that anyway? It's either 400 years or it isn't.
Yeah.
400 moons, 400 days.
so what we're for sure being told, what we can all agree upon here, is that his book and our book were different. And the question is why? Like what's not included in our book that he had in his? So I think to kind of give a little introduction here to kind of explain this, we talk about all of these factors in our lives. We have the physical reality, we have the spiritual reality, and indeed, every human's different. Why are we all different? Why are the priorities of one human different than the priorities of the other? Right? Why do people behave differently? And the answer is that us humans, we have the capacity of assigning value to certain entities. And our decisions are a reflection of our value system. So I say, money or life, right? What do you do? Well, what's more valuable?
Money.
Jack Benny used to say, "I'm thinking it over."
As we know it.
So that's a good question, and people say, okay, well, I value my life more because if I don't have my life, then what use is still my money for me, right? But if I said, hey, what would you rather, your career or kids? As a lot of people make that decision every day, right? Or right, it's like, well, we're not having kids till we're ready because we're trying to go the career, and and he's in law school and she's doing her residency, and we can't think about that and get back to us in 10 years, right? That's a decision a lot of people make, right? They choose to, because to them, their career is more important than the prospect of having children, right? And other people would choose otherwise, right? Because to them, children are more important. And, we see people all the time, when they have a career and they abandon their career because it disrupts their family life. And, of course, we're not talking, we're saying that this is the reality. The reality is that everyone chooses what's important to them, and therefore that's how they behave. Now, everyone's life is important to them, right? But is your life the most important thing to you? Is it?
And compared to what?
Is it the most important thing? So they have a lot of people that go to the army and they give up their lives for their country. Why? Because to them, their country and protecting the people of the country is more important than their lives. That's
okay. They risk their lives for that. Maybe
Well,
we're
they
talking
risk.
semantics here. But,
okay, fine. Or the prospect of the losing their life doesn't stand.
Okay.
Right? And that's common. And we know people would give up their lives for their children, for their fellow man. Like that happens all the time, where people do heroic things to save other people, and they give up their lives for it.
Yeah, the woman,
So
the principal, the bus driver.
There was a story about this recently. Yeah, they
Yeah.
pushed the kids out of the way or something
Yeah,
like that.
she died, but she saved the kids. In the,
And I'm sure if you asked her beforehand, like if you have the opportunity to save a couple of kids, but it meant giving up your lives, clearly this is a heroine who would have chosen to save the kids' lives and give up hers.
And
So
Jefferson said the tree of liberty must sometimes be watered with the blood of patriots.
that's right.
So, that's kind of.
Let's use Trump.
as long as it's somebody else, as long as the other guy.
And we value our family, and some people, they value their business more than they value their family, and they ignore their family. But I'm saying, but we don't have to get so caught up with the big questions of life, but even the small questions of life, right? I have, should we go out to eat, or should we go see a movie? Well, which one's more important, right? Which one is, that's a decision that you make.
Now you can do both. If they put Alamo thing or something, you can eat and see a movie at the same time.
We were at Texas Roadhouse and went to 13 hours last night.
We have the Torah classes on Sundays, or the tailgating to the football game. They're both important. Which is more important, right? We'll see if you show up or not, right? this is that's who we are as humans. Now, some people could decide that sports are very important to them, like they live and die for sports. Other people everyone could decide things. It's all arbitrary, right? You could decide that your stamp collection is so important to you that it's like, oh, everything's stamp collection, right? Mm-hmm. And to us, most of us, not a stamp collection, that's a bunch of, especially if they're used stamps, you can't use them anymore, right? It doesn't make any sense. Like, why would someone invest so much into something so meaningless? But for them, they could take something which essentially is meaningless and give it value and prioritize that in their lives. But either way, our life is going to be, or who we are as a spiritual person, is what is this construction of our spiritual of our value system. Like, what do we prioritize? And as Jews, we're commanded to prioritize God. And not only that, what happens if God is a priority in our lives, but there's something else that's a higher priority? What does that mean? Huh?
That means you have a guy
Why?
before somebody.
My goodness.
Idolatry.
And then that means that's an idolatry. And that's why it made sense, by the way, that you have some other God within you. What? If there's something that's higher than God in your totem pole, well, what does that mean? There's something that's more prioritized.
You have other gods.
There's something
before
else that is, and that's exactly right. And this kind of makes the realm of idolatry more expansive for us, no?
But there's a conflict
I've been
there
worshiping my wife.
because
Apparently,
you
I'm
value
a
life,
Jew, right?
say your children's life, and that interferes maybe
going
with
to hell.
worship or coming to service.
Well, what's interesting, so maybe not coming to services, but that we're told in the Talmud, right, it's Jewish law, everyone knows this, that if someone says, do idolatry or I kill you, that the Jewish response is, bite the bullet, right? That's the Jewish response. Why? Because that is a manifestation of the fact that we choose God above our lives. Our life is a priority, of course, but God's a higher priority. So if there's going to be a conflict between the two, we just chose that we don't realize that we're doing this, by the way. We don't realize how we're just, our whole life we're constructing and arranging these priorities, but our behaviors are always reflecting them. Whenever there's a conflict of the two, we choose the one that's more important to us. So if there's something that's higher than God, if our life, for example, is higher, more of a priority than God is, then what happens? If there's a conflict between the two, we'll choose the higher priority, which will be our life. And in Judaism, we're told, no, you got to prioritize God more than your life, and thus, if there's a conflict, you got to choose God, and even if it means giving up your life.
My life, your life, that's one thing. But what about your kids? They would always come first to me, children.
Okay,
What's your priority?
Like in
I know,
a
I'm
life
saying-
and death situation.
Well, but the question is, in what situation? Means we're also told that if someone says, do any prohibition against the Torah, ostensibly against God, or I kill you, we do the prohibition. There's only certain things like idolatry and murder and adultery, only those kinds of things that we have to give up our lives to not transgress. So most instances, there's not going to be there's almost very infrequently going to be a conflict like that. But, and therefore our kids are really, of course, a really high priority for us. And thankfully, we're not likely to have a scenario where that will come in conflict with God. But if they're a higher priority than God, then that means there's something that is essentially an idol. If there's something that's more priority, then what does it mean to be idolatry? Does it just mean to bow down to some sort of figurine in the corner of the room? No one does that anymore. Right? We're expanding the idea of idolatry. Idolatry is when someone has something that's in a higher priority than God. And what about Abraham? Right? So for us, step one is going to be make God a priority. Step two would be make God the top priority. Where's Abraham fit in? Abraham, his book was expanded to 400 chapters.
Where did he get the book?
Huh?
If he's a father of Judaism, where did he get the book already?
Well, the question is this an actual book or this is a perspective? right? Because remember, we have the book. So if he had the same book, you'd have a question. Apparently, he had a different book, right? But it's not an actual book. It's actually what it's telling us is who Abraham was as a person. And what it's really telling us is that Abraham had God not only as a priority, and not only as a top priority, but as the only priority. To Abraham, anything that was not God was part of his 400 chapters. He expanded everything that was not God to be in the realm of idolatry. Thus, he had so many chapters. It was so big. Anything in the world that's not God is no value to him whatsoever.
But then how did he manage to bring up Isaac?
Okay, so what kind of life is that? The answer is that, yes, things have value, but only relative value. So everything is judged only vis-a-vis the only priority. God is the only priority, the only value that has intrinsic, essential value onto its own. Everything else only has value relative to God. Thus, so if your mitzvah, so to speak, to God is going to be to raise your kids, then you raise your kids because it's going to bring you to God. Everything kind of leans back to that original idea. Breakfast, right? Why do we have breakfast? Well, to us, we like breakfast. It's food. It's priority. For us, it's its own priority. For Abraham, breakfast allows him to serve God. It's a priority because it's linked to the only priority. It has value only relative to God.
So in essence, unless we more or less are in order of knowing, in other words, you basically, to realize if you're committing idolatry in that form would be to be a rather religious person and know that you're godly in order to be able to experience that. Do you see what I'm saying? No, you don't.
No, but you're saying if we were working within Abraham's context,
not in Abraham's, but I mean even in this in today's society, to get a grasp on a clue that you're actually having idolatry within you, then you would have to be somewhat of a religious person.
Oh yeah, it means, and not only I don't think it's not only religious. I think you have to be mindful, because most of us don't realize what is actually motivating your behavior.
Yeah,
because it has always been motivating our behavior, and we've always been controlled by this foreign god, and therefore to us that's just the way things are. We don't kind of zoom out and, so to speak, look at ourselves without the partiality of kind of the influence and the control that we're being under. But Abraham, this is a radically different idea. This is much more advanced. This is not just God's a priority and now, okay, then the Yetzer Hara is going to be in conflict. This is anything in the world, everything in the world has no value unto its own. It has value because it can bring you to God. So anything you'll do, you will only do because it's going to link you back to the only priority in life. Now, obviously, if you do that, then what does that mean? It means anything that has any value unto its own is idolatry. Well, how big would that book be?
So if Abraham separated everything out, God here and 400 chapters or whatever over there, what happened to Ein Od? There is nothing else but God, and all that, the earth and everything therein is Him. He encompasses us all, right?
Oh, well, okay. I'm going to agree with the first part of the question and not the second part. So you're saying, well, is there something higher? Is that what you're intimating?
No. If He is everything, He created everything.
Well, we don't say He is everything. That's we have to be very careful with the semantics, because He's not everything. And I'll prove it to you. Because if He was everything, we wouldn't be able to have free will, correct?
Well, that's why He has
free will
within His creation. No.
Okay, so let's say it like this. Maybe it's a better way to say it. He powers everything. He enables everything. And in a true world, he would be the only thing that really matters. But it doesn't mean that he is everything. It's very careful. Kind of I have the sensitivity. It's like the fingernails and chalkboard kind of thing. But you're right. And I think that Abraham still has 400 chapters of something. And of course, he labels those 400 chapters as idolatry. Because anything unto its own is idolatry. Anything that's not God is idolatry. Doesn't mean he wouldn't engage in those things, but he would in the context of bringing him to what is his only priority. Now, I want to stress this. This is not something we can obtain. This is not a level we can obtain. Right? We're maxed out at level 6. And hopefully we'll get to level 4 or 5 even, but this is Abraham. This is a very high level. This is where
level was it?
Level 9, where the whole physical world, everything that's not God, has no value whatsoever.
How do you get to this?
I'm sure he climbed the levels by himself.
Get in the elevator.
It's not the elevator. Go where you would take the steps.
But I know for myself, it's just, I finally came to a life. I tried studying all this mystical stuff and all that. And then I'm at the point now where I'm just I just need the basics, I do. Mm-hmm. And then that way I can maybe comprehend all of the idolatry, all of the things that bring bad stuff into my life. I want to just get the basics down.
And I think the Torah is our tool and our manual to climb up this ladder. And we start from the Torah, and we don't need to do anything mystical or anything deep or exciting or scintillating or Kabbalah or esoteric.
Yeah.
We don't need that. We have the Torah. The Torah is our guidebook. And if we follow the Torah, we'll get there. And if we try to take the fast route, the elevator, by going the route of Kabbalah and let's just go to the top, then we'll probably get stuck in the elevator. And that's no fun. That's a little claustrophobic.
Going back to this lady's comment about children, where you put them as your priority, and then tie that back with Abraham.
Oh, I was going to say that.
He didn't think that he would ever have a child, and then in old age, miraculously, he had a child. And then what does God say? Sacrifice this child. I don't think I can't see that he would have done it joyfully. There probably was a lot of pain in his heart, but he did. I mean, he was so, even though God stopped him from doing it, he saw in his heart, in Abraham's mind and heart, he had
everything was devoted.
Exactly. And I actually, Steve will confirm here that I actually have that written in my notes here.
Wow.
That is it in my notes?
Well, there's a lot of
tests of Abraham.
Yes.
Okay, so that's exactly what it was. Of course, to murder your child is evil.
Yeah.
And that's something that we would never do. But why won't we do it? Is it because it's evil unto its own? Is that a value unto its own? Or is that because of God?
God says not to do it.
So essentially, when God tells him, go murder your own child, he's placed with a conflict of the very last value that maybe he could have to just murdering your own child in cold blood. That's something that we would say, we don't even need God for that, right? That's some value unto its own. Mm-hmm. And then God says, okay, I'm going to tell you to do that. And we'll find out if that's a value unto its own or that's only connected, linked to God.
And we typically focus on Abraham and his faith in that story, but Isaac was not this little toddler. He was probably a teenager, maybe older.
37 years old.
And Abraham is
He was 37?
Yes.
No
Yeah,
joke.
but
I was
since
thinking
he did
5 or
37
6.
was different at that time.
I was thinking
37 is
5
the
or
new
6.
5.
Second, he didn't get from medical school.
Yeah,
so he was
and
a
I think if you
teenager.
actually look
Suppose
at,
Abraham said no.
well, then that would have proven that Abraham wasn't quite there, that this was the only priority. That would have just proven to him that he had some priority aside from God. That would be the priority of not killing innocent children, especially when they're your own children.
In his teens.
Right? And I'll give you another example, right? One of Abraham had 10 tests famously, right? One of the 10 tests was to send his own son, Ishmael this time, send him packing and say, okay, I'm taking you out, go on your own. Now, Abraham was known for his kindness, correct? Mm-hmm. Doesn't that seem to be antithetical to kindness? Where's the kind Abraham?
Could be construed as tough love.
Right? But Abraham welcomes in even foreigners. Abraham welcomes in the pagans. Everyone who comes to Abraham's door, he's so welcoming and hospitable to them. And his own child, he sends him packing and says, just fend off for yourself.
Yeah,
Right.
look where he started already, Ishmael.
Oh, yeah. Now, what does that mean?
That was God's plan.
What
John.
Abraham is
Don't
being
just-
tested in is your kindness. Is that a value unto its own? Is that a priority unto its own, or is that a priority because God wants it to be a priority? And therefore, when Abraham disavows his kindness because of God, that demonstrates that his kindness throughout his life is because of God. So all these steps are steps to demonstrate. And you say, like, God says, do a bad thing. Why would God say do a bad thing, right? The answer is because God is saying do a good thing, but do a good thing against what I'm telling you. And that will demonstrate if you're doing good things because of God or doing good things because they have value unto their own. Does that make sense? Huh?
A little bit. I don't understand though why God would. How would Abraham know whether or not that was God?
Well, he had prophecy. Abraham is a prophet.
Okay.
Abraham has already eclipsed level 8. He's
So
a
none
prophet.
of us are ever going to. In our world, we're never going to experience God telling us to kill our child.
That's right. And if we do, we shouldn't do it,
We
right?
should go to have psychiatric.
Come talk to me. All right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Andrea Yates
There are
said
people
that
who-
God told her.
Right,
to
but
do
she wasn't. She's not.
Yeah,
she was
that's
not
what I'm
mentally
saying.
healthy.
We're not going to see that in our lifetime.
But
Right,
it does happen.
Yeah,
But they end up in the psychiatric ward or jail.
Yeah, well.
Right. So, but I think it's still
people
valuable,
really
even if
do
it's
it.
not practical. It's still valuable. It's still Torah. We're still trying to understand Abraham, right? The Torah makes a big deal out of Abraham, and we have to try to dig deeper, try to find out where was he in his spiritual
So
growth.
again, what is the difference between 8 and 9? 9 is Abraham.
8 is going to be prophecy.
Is just a
And we have-
run-of-the-mill prophecy.
Right. Well, run-of-the-mill prophecy is not run-of-the-mill prophecy. It's the idea of prophecy at large. And like we said, prophecy is a lot of different levels. The prophecy of David and the prophecy of Joshua and the prophecy of Abraham and the prophecy of Ezra. These are different levels of prophecy. Like at the end of the prophecy, there's like the waning era of prophecy because everyone knew that prophets were disappearing because the quality of the prophets was diminishing. So they were still prophets, but they weren't the same prophets as in the robust era of prophecy. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this really explains a lot about Abraham. Like Abraham's coming together now. Abraham is someone who's kind. He's someone who has faith. Right? Those two are born out of the same core entity. Remember, the Torah presents Abraham as the paragon of kindness, while he's the most famous for us because he's the paragon of monotheism. He's the developer of monotheism. Right? Why is he presented in the light of kindness? The answer is because that all came from the same thing. To him, he had God as the only priority. And that was manifested with whatever God wants. So God wants us to be kind. God himself is kind, right? He wants us to be kind, so Abraham was kind. Of course, that was a byproduct of his system, internal system of values. And then God tells him, don't be kind. And he's not kind. Because he's not kind, because his kindness at large is not because of something that's isolated and that's not connected to God. It's because of God. And therefore, when God tells you not to do it, you don't do it. And the ultimate kindness, or the ultimate anti-kindness, would be killing your own son. And that was a common thing at the time for the pagans to do. Sacrifice, child sacrifice, and to kill your own kid. That was a common thing. And then God tells Abraham, okay, let's show me your stripes. Are you against pagans because you're against pagans? Means because you think it's barbaric? Or because of God? Thus, when all that comes into conflict, when all the things that Abraham did and refrained from doing, that came into conflict with what God wanted him to do, right? When God asked him explicitly to do, we were shown with absolute certainty that the only influence in his life was God, and that's level 9, and level 10, like you mentioned, where nothing else exists. So let's look a little bit at Moses. Kind of walk through a little bit of some of the highlights of Moses' career, and see how maybe this is even a level higher. Abraham had a book It had 400 chapters, and in it was delineated everything in the world that's not God. So every behavior, every good behavior, every bad behavior that you refrain from, everything that you could possibly enjoy, everything that you could see or touch, feel, think about, dream about, anything that was not God. And that book was, I'm sure, something that he studied, and because this was his book of idolatry. Everything that was not God was included in idolatry. Even good things that we would say kindness is a good thing. But if it's not in the realm of what God told you to do as kindness, God tells you not to do kindness, well, then it's idolatry to be kind. Had Abraham been kind to Ishmael when God tells him to not be kind to Ishmael, that kindness would be tantamount for Abraham to idolatry. But he still had a book. Moshe didn't have the book. Moshe's level is where he was living in Olam Haba. If you went to Olam Haba, if you were able to be granted VIP access for a little bit, you wouldn't find those things that Abraham had in his book. It's not like you would have to reject them like Abraham had to reject them. You wouldn't have to write them all down in this vast book of idolatry. They wouldn't exist. Yeah, they may exist, you won't see them. In the exact, if you can make a mirror image of planet Earth, of our world, of our existence, and just change the reality, right? You have our spiritual reality that's totally covered up, and our physical reality is totally manifest. If you could change that upside down, that's what Olam Haba is. Yeah, you may have a physical reality, but you will never notice it. Just like we have a soul, we don't even think about the soul. We don't notice it. We ignore it. Take that, flip it on its head. That's what Olam Haba is. You don't notice that you're a body. You have a body. You can live your whole life and not noticing you have a body. You're just soul first, and the body's not even there. Moses didn't have to write this book of idolatry because he didn't notice it. In his world, he was living here like he was in Olam Haba. Now, what are some characteristics of Olam Haba? So we're told in the Talmud there's no eating, there's no drinking, there's no sleeping. The body doesn't factor in. Moshe goes up to the heaven, and he comes back down, and he tells us, mentioned several times in the Torah, that for 40 days and 40 nights he didn't eat nor drink. And I don't know if it's explicit, but he didn't sleep either. The same things that we're told that do not happen in Olam Haba, Moshe didn't do in this world. Moshe didn't eat, drink, or sleep. Now, how does the human survive without eating or drinking? How do you do it? You'll die. You'll die because our iterations of humans are ones that the body is such an influence and such a force that it needs to be tended to.
Well, in that 40 days, Moses was not, could it be construed, he was in God's world, not in the physical world?
Oh, yeah, but he was capable of going there. We wouldn't be able to go there.
Okay. But isn't that the answer to how he did it?
Well, that's the answer. Well, okay, but when he emerged from the mountain, did he retain that or not?
Probably not. I assume he ate.
Okay,
when he
so that's
got
the
back.
question. Oh, well, that's a good question. But either way, he was at least able to touch that point, to reach that point at some point in his life, right? Now, additionally, we're told that Moshe, when he was up in the heavens, he time traveled. That's right, to Rabbi Akiva. Now, why are we not capable of time traveling, and Moshe is capable of time travel? The answer is because Moshe was living as an untethered soul, right? The reason why we're living in a very rigid, fixed world, because our body, right, is a citizen of that world, and we are our body. Moshe was able to entirely divest himself of any influence of his body, and he was living entirely in the spiritual realm, and therefore his soul was free to go wherever it wished. Now, what's interesting is that the Almighty kind of nudges him along, so you could say, if you read that Talmudic passage that talks about Moshe's time traveling in Menachos 29b, it does say that the Almighty kind of nudges him along. So maybe yes, but either way, why can't we be nudged along, right? Because we're not quite there. Our body still, wields a lot of influence over us. We're not in Olam Haba, we're in Olam Hazeh, we're in this world. And this world we gotta eat, we gotta drink, we gotta sleep, and we can't time travel. And Moshe is on a level where none of that is in existence. He doesn't see resistance, so to speak. His soul sees no resistance. I'll give you some more examples if you don't like time travel, because it gets a little too sci-fi for you. Give you some more examples here. We're told that Moshe had prophecy ba'aspaklaria me'ira. With aspaklaria me'ira, which means with clear aspaklaria, clear visuals. Now, what does that mean? It means that Moshe's prophecy, all the prophets had prophecy ba'aspaklaria she'ena me'ira. All the prophets had prophecy with aspaklaria, with clarity that's not clear. Moshe had with clear clarity, or clear aspaklaria. Hard to define that word exactly. Moshe had clear prophecy, everyone else had muddled prophecy. Why? If you're a prophet, I'll tell you how you do it. Quick and dirty tips to how to have prophecy. Right? So the Ram tells us there's several differences between Moshe's prophecy and everyone else's prophecy. Number one, Moshe had direct instructions, as opposed to imagery that you interpret. So for example, Jacob, we spoke about Jacob a little bit ago. Jacob is going to sleep, and he sees a ladder. The ladder is, it's the top of the ladder is in the heavens, and the foot of the ladder is on land, and he sees angels going up and down. Now, that was a dream, but that was also a prophetic dream. And that's an example of a prophecy of every other prophet aside from Moses. Number one, it's by night. Number two, it's in the form of a dream. Number three, it's in the form of imagery that the prophet himself has to interpret it. Right? As a prophet, you learn how to interpret your visions. Moshe, he's not sleeping. There's no imagery. It's direct instructions. It doesn't go through any angels. There's no intermediate, so to speak, to deliver the prophecy to the prophet. Moshe has direct communication with God in the form of instructions. Not only that, Thuram tells us that when a prophet prophesizes, they're shaking violently. It's not a very, very pleasant experience. The reason why it's not a pleasant experience for a prophet to have prophecy is because when you have prophecy, you have prophecy. The only question is, what is you? You is going to be body and soul. Correct?
Right.
To the degree that your body exists, you're going to have a hard time having prophecy. Your body is not capable of prophecy. Not at all. It's not. It's not. So when you have prophecy, there's a part of you that's going to be rebelling. It's going to be too much for you. And to the degree that with which the body is stronger and bigger, that's how much more difficult prophecy will be. And how more painful it, so to speak, is, because your body's not able to handle it. Your body's getting electrocuted, so to speak. Moshe is awake, he's fine, because his body's not at all of a factor. He's just a soul. Yeah, he has a body, but who is he? He's a soul. And not only that, the Ram adds another thing, is that he has prophecy whenever he wants, as opposed to the rest of the prophets. They have to be ready for prophecy, and they get prophecy if the Almighty decides to give it to them. So we see 5 differences between the prophecy of Moses and the prophecy of all the other prophets. And it's not just random differences. It's because Moshe was a different entity. Moshe was someone that had completely divested himself of any shred of physical reality and totally lived in the spiritual realm. The only influence that he had was his soul. Abraham had a soul plus 400 chapters of body, which to him was idolatry. But even if you have idolatry, there's something there. There's something there to reject.
Where do we get maybe I missed something, where do we get this 400 chapters of Abraham. His book or whatever.
Yeah, so the Talmud tells us that Abraham had 400 chapters of idolatry. Now, the question is, what does that mean? What are they trying to say? Did he have a really, really thick book? Did he have to bind it really difficultly? What it's telling us is that his perspective of idolatry was much vaster.
No, I got that.
Yeah.
I got that. Just the idea.
Yeah, so it's in the Talmud.
The Talmud, somebody wrote that there was.
Yeah, but remember, they're telling us something deep here. We're trying to understand what they're trying to tell us. Okay.
But
Now,
no
So
one can read
Moses,
it, right?
Moses
Nobody
he
can read
had
it.
this ability to be this level 10 prophet. It eventually he acquired this ability.
oh, he moved up the level. He moved up the
When?
levels.
When?
Good question. When did he get to the top? So, and how did that really affect him? Because it's actually very interesting. Maybe we'll talk about this now. Oh, we'll talk about it a little bit, but remind me to talk about kind of the difference between Moshe before he got there and after he got there. I'll give you guys another example about how Moshe was different. We're told, if you guys remember, a couple months back, we quoted the Midrash that talks about what happens to the soul and body when they get united. Body goes into the soul goes into the body, and the soul is very miserable, right? Your soul is depressed beyond belief, because for the soul to be put in the body in unity, it's very painful because it's the opposite. It's being forced against its will into a marriage that it doesn't want.
Wow.
And the Almighty kind of compels the soul to be harbored within the body. And death for us is separation of soul and body. For the soul, it's liberation. Because the soul is finally liberated from the confines of the body that was holding it hostage, so to speak, through the 70, 80, 90, 100 years of our lives. They're opposites. And they only exist because of the will of the Almighty, that they should exist together. And therefore, death is just very exciting for the soul. It's very painful, of course, for the human at large, or it could be very painful, but for the soul, it's liberation. We find at the end of the Midrash, the very same Midrash that told us that, tells us what happened when Moshe died. There's a very long dialogue between Moshe and all the angels that the Almighty sends to take his soul out of him. So if I remember, Moshe's communicating with angels, talking, no problem, right? I guess if you could talk to God, what's the big deal to talk to angels? So there's all these angels that he sends, and Moshe repels them. Moshe rebuffs them. And God sends like a good angel, and Moshe rejects him, sends him packing. God sends a bad angel, and Moshe destroys him. Tells him, no chance. And then the Almighty himself says, okay, I'm going to come and take away Moshe's soul. So he comes, and we have this very emotional discussion, dialogue between the Almighty and Moshe's soul. And the Almighty tells the soul, Biti, my daughter, come. Your time has come, and I got a special place for you. You don't have to worry about it. You're perfect. You're clean. You don't have to worry about any retribution. You're good to go.
You're home free, right?
You're home free. And what does Moshe's soul respond? There's no better place for me to be than in the body of Ben Amram, of Moshe. While our soul is suffering every instant that it's in our body, because the body is just so there and so overbearing, Moshe's body was spiritual. Moshe's body was a better locale, a better venue for his soul to be harbored than under God's heavenly throne. Moshe didn't have this conflict. His soul did not have any inhibitors. His soul was free already within him. It wasn't at all hindered by his body. And of course, that was reflected in his prophecy and his ability to go 40 days without eating or drinking, and his ability to time travel. His soul was free, was free already within the body. And additionally, Moshe goes down from the mountain, right? So he's up in the mountain, and he goes up to the mountain. He's there for 40 days and 40 nights. He does time travel in the interim. He comes back down, and what happens?
busted up the commandments.
Well, yeah,
But
okay.
the people had lost faith.
Well, some of the people lost faith, and he intervenes, and he goes back up again, and comes back down again. And when he comes back down, the people are finally forgiven. The people cannot look at him. If you look at the chapter, I think it's 34 of Exodus, Moshe's face is as bright as the sun. Y'all remember that?
Something like that, yeah.
So Moshe puts on a mask that he would wear for the rest of his life.
If you don't remember it, you'll read it next week.
Yeah, well, no, we're not quite there next week.
Week after next.
Well, Mishpatim, Teruma, Tetzava, Kisisa. So in 4 parshas, but I think Shunzav no. So it's 4. It's not this week. I think Kisisa and the Kisisa. We just did Yisro, right?
Yep.
Mishpatim, Teruma, Tetzava, Kisisa. A couple of weeks. So why can't the people look at him? Why is his face so bright? Right?
Yeah. Well,
What changed? And what's the idea of Moshe's face is like the sun? What's that idea? So we're told.
He's God's representative on earth. Because you can't.
Well,
look
we're
on
all
God.
God's representative.
Well, yeah.
But he couldn't look at it. The people couldn't look at him. The answer is that Moshe did not have anything hindering his soul. There was nothing to kind of take away the ultraviolet rays of his soul. And we're told, and there's many Talmudic and textual, scriptural verses that talk about Olam Haba, the next world, as being like the sun, as bright as the sun. For example, V'ohavav ketseis hashemesh b'gvuraso, that like the people in Olam Haba are like the sun going out in its strength. There's other examples. For example, the Talmud that talks about Olam Haba is similar to 3 things. We had a whole class on that, if you all remember. The Olam Haba is like 3 things. It's like Shabbos. It's like the sun. And the sun is something that's so beyond us, we can't see it, we can't fathom it. We can't even look at it, right? Even though it's in this world. You try looking at the sun, right? Try and do the sun stare for 10 seconds. You can't do it. Why not? Because it's beyond you. It's a different realm. Huh?
Not recommended.
It's not recommended, that's right. And I'll get to it in a second. And Moshe was there in this world. He achieved the level of Olam Haba in this world, where his soul was the only influence in his life, and the body was not there to kind of mask it, so he had to put on an artificial mask.
Is that why God buried his body? That there was no body when he took him back to the mountain?
There was still there's still a body. That's the thing. There's still a body, but the body has no sway. And if the Moshe looked like the sun, you probably wouldn't be able to see his body. Try looking at the sun and imagine there's a body on it. You can't look at it, right? It's too bright. So the soul was so overwhelming that the body was insignificant. So the fact there was an actual body, right? He still was a human, still had body and soul connected, but the body and the soul were indistinguishable. Now, so
and
you
none
mentioned
of that was metaphorically speaking.
Oh, well, it says he put on a mask. You know, he actually put on the mask. So I'll give you as an example about kind of what how Moshe changed and how it was reflected in his perception. If y'all remember, in this very same room, about a year and a half ago, we talked about the question of theodicy, of why bad things happen to good people. And it's interesting that, first of all, Jewish sources do not shirk away from talking about this. Obviously, as sensitive, as careful we have to be when we talk about this, it's something that we address. And there's 2 conversations that the Talmud records, a dialogue between Moshe and the Almighty on this issue, where Moshe asks God, why are bad things happening to good people? And the fact that there's 2 conversations is very interesting, because if you ask God the question and God gives you an answer, why would you ask again? And why would you be given a different answer? And it's also interesting is that these 2 dialogues are time-stamped, We know exactly when the first time this discussion was brought up, and we know the second time it was brought up.
So something changed with him.
So something changed with Moshe, and that's reflected in his answer that he got and how he understood the answer. And indeed, I don't want to get into it, but it's interesting to if you look, and I'll advise everyone, subscribe to the podcast and find the class. Right? It's there. Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. We did it in this very room, and we do talk about this at great length. Kind of why Moshe asked the question, and he got one answer before he reached level 10. And then he asked the question again after he's reached level 10, and he gets a different answer. And Moshe essentially is asking the question again. The question's on Moshe, right? You asked the question once, why would you ask the question again? The answer is that Moshe recognized that he had moved up a stage, and that maybe now he would understand it. And he asked the question again, and indeed he gets a different answer. Which, by the way, as a side note, makes our foray into that question difficult to know. Like if Moshe himself didn't understand it at level 9 or wherever he was prior, it's possible there's 1,000 levels, right? But we're calling level 10. He hadn't quite reached his pinnacle, and he had a hard time understanding it. That should give us pause if we are to consider that we'll understand it fully as well.
Might be moved.
Well, no. So yes, we did kind of address this question and kind of how we can understand it, in what context we can understand it. But either way, it is interesting to know that when Moshe goes up to the mountain and he asks the question the first time, and then when he comes down after he's had this second trip to the mountain and he's had the second, achievement in his levels of Emunah, how he sees the world differently now, what would the world look like if you were entirely spiritual? What would make sense and what wouldn't make sense? Right. And how it's addressed to him then. It's just very interesting to kind of chart it all out. Okay, so now what about us, right? We're like
Hopeless.
languishing at the lowest levels of faith, and we're trying to find meaning in life, and where are we, and how do we go about from this? So I think that just our knowledge and our understanding is a lot. I think that this could be viewed as an introduction to Jewish life in general, at large. What's the Torah? The Torah is a guidebook to upgrading our Emunah, essentially upgrading our soul from being dormant to being active, activating our soul. That's one way of viewing the Torah, of pushing us up these levels. And we start off maybe at level 0, and we move up. Society pushes us to 1 or 2, and maybe on our own we could get to level 3, and then level 4 with mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are going to help us get to level 4 and maybe even 5. And that's fantastic. And I think, we have some more, I think, to talk about this issue in this series. Unfortunately, we didn't get to where I wanted to get to. It's always a symptom of really interesting and really important discussions. But we're going to talk a little bit about, okay, so what does this mean for us? How do we expand this to Tikkun Olam? Tikkun Olam, what's Tikkun Olam? Tikkun Olam is to fix the world. To fix the world, right? We have a broken world. The body, soul, spiritual, physical paradigm is so skewed in one way where God's ignored. And our job as Jews is to fix that. But we're going to try to maybe find some time to kind of get into the more specifics. But I think really every discussion that we have and every kind of practical integration of Torah into our lives is going to push us up this level. And I think when you have the big picture of where it all stands and where we stand and where we can go, where we ought to go, where we're obligated to go, it makes our relationship with Torah entirely different. Torah is the tools that the Almighty gives us to upgrade our humanity. To go to human 3.0, right? 4.0 we could do that. We change who we are. Moshe started off also, he was a crying baby in a box. Right? We take our kids, we put them in boxes or cribs, however you want to call them, and they're crying babies, And he started off like that, and look where he got to.
He was even a felon, a wanted murderer.
I think it was self-defense.
Yeah.
And he started off like we do. Now, granted, we accept the fact that we can't get there, probably. But we can get closer. And Maimonides tells us we can get there. We can be like Moshe. So maybe we can't be level 10, but we could be, maybe our Moshe, our level of our max achievement to be level 6, and we need to get there as well. That would be as great as Moshe, because Moshe maximized what he was able to do, and we'll maximize what we can do.
Was his only level 10 in history?
Oh yeah, Moshe. Yeah. Maybe there's a question about Adam. Adam pre-sin might have been there as well, but Adam kind of was put there.
Didn't earn it.
Yeah, he didn't earn it. That's right.
That's the way to go.
So this is if you want to knot up someone someone who has experience in Jewish thought, and say, okay, Moshe after Mount Sinai versus Adam pre-sin. Just say those words and watch them go into a tizzy. Because it's a very good question.
So basically, you just answered my question when he graduated from 9 to 10.
Yeah, well, after science. So we look at Tisisa and look kind of him going down from the mountain, and he has this very intriguing dialogue with God. Hareini nas fordecha, show me your glory. And God says, well, you can't see my face because he, put you in the cleft of the rock, and my glory will pass. But what is going on over there? It's very hard for us to find what this is. This is Moshe kind of living on a different realm than we are. And that's where he reaches his pinnacle. We don't assume that he lost it, right? He didn't lose it for the rest of his life. Okay, so that's that, guys. I encourage everyone to download the podcast and look forward to seeing you guys next time. Lots of fun.
What's next time?
Next week.
No, I mean,
Super Bowl.
what's the topic?
Super Bowl.